Hi, and welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 45. We're going to talk about Legend of the Werewolf from 1975. I watched this on YouTube. I had not seen this before. Let's start by discussing the prominent crew and cast. This film was directed by Freddie Francis. It was written by Anthony Hines, billed as John Elder, with effects makeup done by Jimmy Evans and Graham Freeborn. I was interested to learn that Freddie Francis was not a fan of special effects, and he made a werewolf movie. He felt that effects got in the way of the cinematography. Considering Freddie got his start as a cinematographer, it's not that surprising. It's just interesting that he would agree to do a movie with so many special effects. I've previously discussed Anthony Hines in relation to his work with Hammer Films and as writer on Curse of the Werewolf. Graham Freeborn worked on several of my favorite films, highlights including the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the first two Christopher Reeve Superman movies, Highlander, and most famously, the original Star Wars trilogy. The cast includes the great Peter Cushing as Professor Paul Cataflanc, David Rintoul as Etoile, Lynn Dalby as Christine, Ron Moody as the zookeeper, Hugh Griffith as Maestro Pamponi, Renee Houston as Choo Choo, Norman Mitchell as Tiny, Mark Weavers as young Etoile, Marjorie Yates as Madame Teller, Stephen Griff as Max Gerard, David Bali as Boulan, and Roy Castle as the photographer. Peter Cushing was an absolute mainstay of Hammer horror. He played Baron Frankenstein in all 6 different Frankenstein films for Hammer and Dr. Van Helsing in 5 different Dracula films. In most of these, he played against his very great friend Christopher Lee as Frankenstein's monster and Dracula, respectively. We do get Mr. Lee in a werewolf picture very soon. Cushing appeared in numerous non-Hammer horror films, like these last 2 movies. He's played the great detective Sherlock Holmes several times as well. Cushing has earned a place on the horror equivalent of Mount Rushmore. He capped all that off with his most well-known role as Grand Moff Vilhoth Tarkin in Star Wars. This film was the first movie role for David Rintoul, who is still working today. He did mostly TV shows in the 20th century before moving to a lot of voice work in animation and a real hit list of cool video games. As near as I can tell, this is Lynn Dalby's only film acting role, even though she did quite a lot of television work. Ron Moody's most important role was easily that of lovable rogue Fagin in the musical Oliver. He originated the role on the London stage before repeating the role on the silver screen. Hugh Griffith was a prolific actor who utilized his size and bushy beard and eyebrows to play brash and raucous types. He served almost 6 years in the British Army during World War II. He appeared in 3 Best Picture Oscar winners, Ben-Hur from 1959, Tom Jones from 1963, and Oliver from 1968, which I find impressive. This was Renee Houston's last acting role. Her increasingly poor health interfered with her capacity to act. Holy cow, Norman Mitchell has over 300 credits listed at IMDb. That's an actor who could get work. He was trained in medicine and served 6 years in the Royal Army Medical Corps in World War II. Mark Weavers only had 3 roles as a child actor. Marjorie Yates has been acting for over 50 years in British film and television. Her most recent credit is from 2022, so she's still at it. Stephen Griff had as long a career as Marjorie did, but he recently passed away. For reasons I have not uncovered, David Bali took a 15-year-long break as an actor. He's best remembered as the Pirate Cotton from Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean films. It is with great relief that I can unequivocally recommend this Peter Cushing werewolf film. First, Cushing plays a major character in this film rather than a bit part like the last one. Second, the werewolf is much more prominent and active in this film. It's a solid, entertaining movie with sympathetic characters, an understandable plot, and a fantastic werewolf. The basics for any great werewolf movie. I find it fascinating that the character played by Peter Cushing was not in the first draft of this film at all. It just goes to show you how much things can change from first draft to final project. I cannot imagine this film working as well as it does without a sympathetic investigator like Professor Cataflanc, particularly when someone of Peter Cushing's talent is portraying them. So now let's review the synopsis. Somewhere in Russia on midnight, Christmas Eve in the mid-19th century, 2 fugitives flee religious persecution. They stop in the forest for the woman to deliver her baby. The mother dies in childbirth. The father is slaughtered by wolves. However, the wolves protect the baby instead of killing it. The baby grows into a wild boy. Years later, a trio of circus performers find the boy while camping by the forest road. He's eating a raw rabbit he killed himself. They cage him and turn him into an attraction called the Wolf Boy. They name him Etoile. He loses his wolfish aspects and his public appeal as he grows up. One night, Etoile changes into a wolf man under the influence of the full moon. He injures one of the trio, a large man ironically named Tiny. As Tiny dies, he accuses Etoile of his murder. Etoile flees. Etoile soon arrives in Paris. Displaying an uncanny knack with animals, he becomes assistant to a drunken zookeeper. That same day, three young ladies visit the zoo to have lunch, and Etoile is smitten by the beautiful Christine. She takes a liking to him, but keeps her job a secret. The three young women are the most modestly dressed prostitutes I've ever seen, who work at a nearby brothel. Etoile defends the animals from three rock-throwing punks, but gets a little too aggressive while driving them off. At a nearby morgue, Dr. Paul Cantinflanc and his friend Inspector Max Girard solve a poisoning murder with forensics and logic. Etoile woos Christine. Etoile decides to take Christine dancing, but he's turned away by Madame Tellier. He tries to sneak in by the window and catches Christine entertaining a client. He bursts through the window and attacks the client in a jealous rage. Madame Tellier stops him. Etoile figures out Christine's job. Christine confronts Etoile the next morning. In the ensuing argument, she tells him her history as an orphan until Madame Tellier took her in. Etoile asks Christine to marry him, but she tells him it wouldn't work. Etoile is clearly obsessed with her, and she won't let herself think about love. That night, Etoile changes into a werewolf again and kills multiple clients, leaving the brothel at different times. He uses the sewers to move around Paris unnoticed. The attacks draw the interest of Paul. He deduces a wolf is responsible. He begins his own investigation despite the protests of Max and inspects the wolves at the zoo. Etoile's demonstration of the wolves' gentleness leaves the professor skeptical. Etoile knows he needs help. Paul re-examines the bodies and takes specific note of their clothes and possessions. The new evidence leads him to the brothel. He questions Madame Tellier, who is offended by his request to identify the bodies. He doesn't give up and brings photographs of the victims. She lies and says she's never seen them. However, Christine also sees the photos. Paul, noting her reaction, questions her in private. She admits they were regular clients, but leaves Etoile out of her story. Meanwhile, the prefect of police decides to make Paul's wolf theory official and orders all zoos to kill their wolves. Etoile is given the grisly task of putting the wolves down and is beside himself with grief. Christine visits. She leaves to get the zookeeper because she thinks Etoile is sick. Etoile changes into a werewolf and flees into the sewer before she returns. With rage and grief spurring his viciousness, Etoile goes on a random killing spree. He kills 3 poor victims this time and hides in the sewers the next day. Paul discovers one of the victims is alive enough to report a creature, neither a man nor a wolf, killed him. The next night, Etoile kills a rich man and a streetwalker. Paul's assistant Boulan tells him of the werewolf tales from his countryside home. Paul gets a hold of a book on lycanthropy and deduces the attacker will kill again the next night. He interviews Christine again and asks her to wait in Etoile's room. Paul notices the sewer entrances near many of the crime scenes. He gets a map of the sewer system and confirms his suspicion. Paul forges a silver bullet as a precaution. That night, Paul descends into the sewers and encounters Etoile. Paul tries to reason with him, offering help. Etoile is temporarily brought back to sanity, but Max, warned by Boulan, attacks at the last minute. An injured Etoile flees to the zoo, followed by Paul. Etoile finds Christine in his room. She is shocked and terrified by Etoile's werewolf form, but Etoile does not hurt her. Paul tries once more to get Etoile to surrender, but Max shoots Etoile in the back with a silver bullet. Etoile dies, changing back into a man, while Christine looks on in grief. It's not surprising the werewolf makeup in this movie really reminds me of Curse of the Werewolf from 14 years earlier, which is a great thing since that werewolf was so good. That said, the transformations themselves were fairly basic, nothing spectacular, but a good-looking werewolf makeup job goes a long way. Now, the werewolf lore is fairly vague and also seems quite similar to the Curse of the Werewolf. The mention of Christmas Day solidifies this idea that a child born on a specific day or under a bad sign can become a werewolf. This movie does add the feral nature of Etoile's upbringing as an important element. It does not make it clear why Etoile changed that first time, killing one of those who raised him. Etoile transforms under the effects of the full moon and extreme jealousy and rage. We do get clear evidence Etoile is immune to non-silver weapons when Max's first 3 shots just drive him off. It takes the silver bullet Paul and Boulan made to finish the werewolf. This film gives us an opportunity to talk about feral children in fiction and in reality. Etoile is a good example of the concept of the feral child, specifically how they are often portrayed in fiction. Feral children are children who have grown up without any human contact from a young age. They are often found in mythological and fictional stories like this movie, where they're raised by animals and as a result possess unique, sometimes supernatural abilities. You can see echoes of Tarzan, Mowgli, and Enkidu in Etoile's story. Tarzan, the titular character from Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs, also known as John Clayton, was raised by gorillas in the African jungle after his parents died. He develops exceptional skills and later discovers his human heritage. Tarzan is perhaps the most aspirational example of this trope, as he experiences almost no challenges adapting to the civilized world after his wild upbringing, at least in the original pulp novels by Burroughs. Newer adaptations do sometimes add this element of struggling to adapt to the social mores of civilization. We see echoes of this tale with how quickly, easily, and completely Etoile adopts the lifestyle of the circus troupe that found him. By the time Etoile arrives in Paris, he is functionally indistinguishable from a normal young man. Mowgli from the Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling is a boy raised by wolves in the jungles of India. The character has become iconic through lots of adaptations, notably the Disney one, highlighting the challenges and adventures of a human growing up in the wild. In some adaptations, it is his attraction to a young lady that sparks Mowgli's desire to rejoin human civilization. In this film, it's Etoile's attraction to Christine that ultimately destroys him because he can't control his jealous rage. My interpretation of the film is that he was never taught to, he never learned how to be fully civilized. Enkidu, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a wild man created by the gods to humble the arrogant king Gilgamesh in this ancient Mesopotamian epic. Enkidu lives in the wild with animals until he encounters the prostitute Shamhat and becomes more human-like and civilized. It's easy to see the parallels with Etoile and Christine's story, even if the werewolf tale ends tragically. In reality, the fate of the extraordinarily rare child who survives in the wild with the assistance of wild animals is never as positive as those fictional and mythological stories would have us believe. There are echoes of Etoile in several real-world examples. Victor was a feral child spotted in the French forest of Avignon in 1797. He displayed limited language skills and was studied by physician Jean-Marc Itard, who attempted to rehabilitate him. Oksana Milana was discovered living with dogs in a kennel in the Ukraine in 1991. Lacking human contact during her early years, she exhibited dog-like behaviors. Efforts were made to rehabilitate her, but integration into human society was challenging. There are other examples as well, but it's tough to tell reality from hoaxes in this arena. Plus, it's a little depressing reading these stories over and over. They always start with a child abused, abandoned, and or orphaned, mistreated and alone. They typically end with a teen or young adult having lifelong troubles with language, socialization, emotional connection, intellectual disability, and often physical complications stemming from extended malnutrition. Feral children have fascinated people for centuries as they offer insights into the effects of socialization on language and behavior. While there are many legends of feral children, only a few cases are documented and verified. As evidenced by this film, there is incentive to fabricate hoaxes. Whether Etoile is an actual feral child isn't actually all that important to the circus troupe. They were already faking the woman as a descendant of the Romanov family at the beginning of the film. They would have faked a wolf child just as easily if they'd thought of it. Feral children grow up without proper models for human communication and instead acquire the skills and behaviors of their adoptive animal families. This highlights the importance of continually hearing, observation, mimicking, and reinforcement in the development of language and communication skills. Feral children may have the potential for human development, but their lack of socialization early hinders their ability to acquire those skills later. Stories of feral children remind us of our roots and the challenges of life in the wild. These children's resilience in the face of adversity is remarkable, but it also emphasizes the importance of human contact and socialization in our formative years. Overall, the stories of feral children shed light on the complexities of human development and the role of socialization in shaping our abilities and our behaviors. Now, one thing I really liked about this film is how it treats prostitution and prostitutes. Up to this point, when we've seen a prostitute in a werewolf film, they were the victim of the monster. Some interpret that as a condemnation of sex workers, that they are somehow acceptable victims who deserve or ask for their fate. I see it more as an acknowledgement that prostitution often necessitates the sex worker put themselves in dangerous and vulnerable situations alone in the dark, away from the prying eyes of law, which also means outside the protective cover of the law. In this film, they are treated with more respect. It may not be the best career choice, and I don't think the movie's making that case, but it's a way not to starve, and the movie refuses to condemn them for that decision. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on discussing Wolf Guy, Enraged Lycanthrope from 1975. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back here next episode.